Congratulations, your training is complete. For 7 days and 7 nights we've travelled across bog, heath and mountain, and I've taught you everything I know on how to survive in the Highlands. Now, before I leave you, I will grant you one final question. I do have one burning question. What's that? Are you wearing any underwear? Am I wearing any underwear? Aye. Your only question is what's going on under my kilt. Well, you know, kind of the done question, right? Are you going through Scotsman in that? I'm not a Scot, I'm a Gael. Look, mate, forget about it, forget about it. I didn't mean for it to be weird. Forget it. Well, you made it weird, man. You made it weird. Fine, well, if you must know, take a peek. Hi folks, Tom from Fandabi Dozi, thanks for tuning in. So it's been a while since I've done a Highland myth busting video, and this topic might seem a bit silly and maybe even a bit irrelevant compared to my previous topics. But believe it or not, that comedy sequence is actually based off many real life encounters. I have lost count the number of times either tourists or students on my Highlander survival courses have asked me this question about underwear. Now, sometimes it comes from a purely practical outdoor perspective, especially when you're dealing with biting insects and walking long distance. But there's also this strange myth about going through Scotsman not having underwear that's spread all around the world. And I've had tourists come up to me, you know, who might know nothing about Scottish history, sometimes can barely speak English, but can still come up to me and go, you're wearing underwear? And really, in any other context, this would be a really inappropriate question, and it might even lead to a sexual harassment case, but for some reason, it's okay to ask a man in a kilt this question. So this has led me to wonder, where has this myth come from? And is it true? So my research and delving into it has led me on a journey from the 14th century right up to the present day. I've learned about the evolution of clothing and cultural identity of Scotland. I've learned how difficult it is to sew a decent crotch, and also I'll share my experiences for what it's like travelling in the Highlands in this historical kit. So these are the topics I'll cover, or you could say uncover, in this video. So to celebrate this new Highland history myth busting, I have a brand new comedy t-shirt over on my merch store right now. It's only going to be around for a month, so grab it quick before it's gone. If you want to join in the banter and monthly live calls and learn wilderness survival, history and martial arts, then come join me on my community-led online survival school, Resilient Roots. Finally, I just want to say a huge thanks to everyone who supports me on Patreon. Honestly, the support on Patreon is what has allowed this channel to be free from interruptions from sponsors for the past 2 years. It's also great getting feedback from folks there about what sort of topics they want to see on the channel. So if you appreciate the work I produce and share, then consider supporting me on Patreon. I would be eternally grateful. You can find the links to all of these on my website, tomlanghorn.com. Thanks for your time. So before I air out the historical facts, let me give you a brief history of no briefs, and this context of this term, going true Scotsman. Now, folks who grew up in Scotland have probably heard this term before, essentially meaning you're not a true Scotsman if you're wearing underwear. So if you're a true Scotsman, you're not wearing underwear. Now, I grew up in Scotland, and ever since I was a kid, I would wear the small kilt, feely beg, at special occasions, like weddings and ceilidhs and stuff. And this term, true Scotsman, has always been floating around these occasions. Little kids going, you going true Scotsman, you going true Scotsman. And I never really questioned what it meant or where it came from until I was in the Army Reserves and still part of Scottish regiments. The kilt is still part of the number 2s of your ceremonial dress. And there they took it very seriously. I even had a sergeant shout at us saying, you guys better not be wearing underwear. And sometimes they would even check to make sure, as if the entire pride of the unit was dependent on whether you had a barrier between your tadger and your tartan. So this made me wonder, where has this myth of the true Scotsman come from? So let's delve into history and find some clues here. Let's first look at the period in the Highlands between the 12th and 15th century, known as the Lordship of the Isles. And this time period in history was actually quite a flourishing and economic prosperous time in the Scottish Highlands. Now, the lordship of the Isles collapsed at the end of the 15th century, and interestingly, the Great Kilt started to evolve after its collapse, at the end of the 15th century into the 16th century. Now, I've talked about the Great Kilt in many of my past videos, and essentially it's a big multifunctional blanket. It's really easy to make, it's simple, and I wonder if it started to evolve as a dress as a sort of reaction to this poverty, to this economic decline in the Scottish Highlands. Now, the first illustrations of what Highland dress looked like wasn't until 1631 during the 30-Year War in Europe, where the King of Sweden hired 800 Highland mercenaries. Now, this shows that the Highland dress was very different compared to what everyone else was wearing in Europe, so much so that it caught the attention of a German illustrator who decided to draw some of these Highland mercenaries. Now, each one of them are wearing their plaids and Highland dress slightly differently, which might kind of, maybe they were showing off to the illustrator kind of different ways of wearing it. You see some of them are wearing kind of breeches or trews, other of them are going bare-legged. But it's interesting because I think this is the point where the uniqueness of the kilt, the novelty of the kilt, is first introduced to the European consciousness when Highland mercenaries are travelling around Europe with this quite strange dress. So now let's move forward to the 1680s to look at a book which is one of the best descriptions we have of the Highlands in this time period. It's called The Description of the Western Islands, written by Martin Martin. Now, Martin was a Gaelic speaker and a native to the Isle of Skye, so all of his descriptions are very matter-of-fact and unjudgmental. So here's a quote from his book that gives us some clues. The plaid wore only by the men is made of fine wool. The length of it is commonly 7 double ells. When they travel on foot, the plaid is tied on the breast with a bodkin of bone or wood. The plaid is tied around the middle with a leather belt. It is pleated from the belt to the knee very nicely. The dress for footmen is found much easier and lighter than breeches or trews. So although Martin doesn't say anything about what they're wearing under their plaids, he does mention how people on foot prefer wearing the plaid over breeches or trews. So it sort of gives a clue that they're not wearing anything under their plaid when they're traveling on foot. Now, there's other little clues from this time period of people wearing very long linen shirts, which at least cover the groin area. So we still don't have a clear answer, but there is a little clue there that people don't like wearing trousers when they're traveling on foot. Now, our second clue takes us to the 1720s to a book called The Letters from the North of Scotland by Edmund Burt. Now, unlike Martin Martin, who was a native, Burt was a British officer, an outsider seeing the Highlands from a new perspective, and he's also a complete snob. Some of his quotes are absolutely hilarious, and I've covered one of his quotes in a previous myth-busting video on wetting the plaid. So here is a little clue from Mr. Edmund Burt. The common habit of the ordinary Highlanders is far from being acceptable to the eye. With them, a small part of the plaid, which is not so large as the former, is set in folds and girt around the waist, to make of it a short petticoat that reaches halfway down the thigh. He goes on to say, the dress is called a quelt, and for the most part they wear the petticoat so very short that in a windy day, going uphill or stooping, the indecency of it is plainly discovered. So thanks to Bert's observation there, he gives a little clue that perhaps they are not going completely covered under their kilts. So maybe this is the beginning of the myth. But let us next question, where does the plaid become what we now call the kilt? Or where does the fili mór, the great kilt, become the fili beg, or the small kilt? Now, the origin of the small kilt, or the fili beg, is still a subject of scholarly debate. But one popular origin story is that it was invented by an Englishman, of all things, a guy called Thomas Rawlinson, who was an industrialist operating in the Highlands in the 1720s. And according to an article published in 1785 in the Edinburgh Magazine, Rawlinson is reported to have invented the small kilt because he thought the great kilt was too cumbersome for his Highland workers. So he said that he essentially removed the top half but kept the lower half by just sort of stitching it all together, and hence he created the small kilt. However, some people debate this origin story, as there is a map of Aberdeen created in 1661 that shows a wee illustration of a man wearing a feely beg in it. Also, there's some Jacobite rising songs prior to Rawlinson's time which mention the feely beg in the lyrics. So potentially other people made it, potentially few people created it. So we don't really know for sure who invented the small kilt. But whether it's true or not, Rawlinson's story of creating the kilt for his factory workers actually, to me, represents an important shift in Scottish history, a shifting in the way of life. To me, it shows the change from pastoralism, i.e. spending your time herding and living outside with your cattle, to industrialism, i.e. working in a factory indoors. Now, of course, also in this time period is one of the major events that changed Highland history forever. That is the Battle of Culloden, where the Jacobites got their arses handed to them and were defeated in 1746. Now, immediately after this battle comes the Disarming Act, where the British government essentially made it illegal to speak Gaelic, to wear the Highland dress and to carry weapons. Now, although the Disarming Act, especially in terms of making Highland dress illegal, wasn't around for that long, it did its damage. And really, that was kind of the beginning of the end of the Fairlie Moor and the rise of the small kilt. Now, the other thing that kind of made the small kilt more widely seen and used was essentially the creation of Highland army regiments for the British Army. Now, this wasn't only an effective and deliberate effort to sort of round up troublesome young Highland men and send them as cannon fodder for the Empire, it was also the beginning of this unified Scottish identity, where the small kilt was kind of a happy medium to kind of unify these different languages and people of Scotland, where it's not as Gaelic and it's not as archaic and associated with the old ways as the Fairlie Moor, but it's also not as lowland and English as trousers. It's kind of somewhere in the middle. And it's here, Scottish regiments going around fighting in Europe for the Empire, that I think I found the origins of going true Scotsman. So it looks like that the earliest known reference of Scottish people going with no underwear, i.e. going true Scotsman, seems to come from a French satirical illustration done in 1815, which shows some French women pretending to tie their shoelaces as they peek up some Scottish soldiers' kilts as they're buying some eggs. Now, there's a few versions around this time period, but this beginning of the 1800s seems to be when this myth of Scotsmen not going with any underwear seems to start. And if you think about it from the regiment's perspective, especially in the 1800s, the British Army, super strict about uniform. Everyone had to be exactly the same. So probably some units, their officers were very strict, probably whether underwear or not. Maybe different units had, some wore them, some didn't, but they wanted to be uniform. So it seems to be the origin of going to Scotsman was from the French, doing little jokey illustrations, poking fun at the Highland regiments, and that myth then seemed to spread. So now, right up to the present day, the 21st century, this myth of going to Scotsman still lingers. But of course, whether you wear underwear or not, seems to depend on what you're doing. If you're doing something active like the Highland Games or Highland backhold wrestling, most of the time people wear underwear, otherwise it'd pretty much be a 100% nudity show. But there's still something about this mysteriousness of, oh, what we've got under there. It's kind of like the myth of the Loch Ness Monster. Something about the unknown, which is still intriguing to visitors to Scotland. And probably all those romantic novels written about men in kilts hasn't helped very much. So, can we bust this myth? Were all Highlanders going true Scotsmen? Well, around the 17th century, early 18th century, the time period that I mainly focus on, there wasn't a unified Scottish identity yet. The Highlanders probably wouldn't have seen themselves as Scotsmen, but instead would have identified as Gaelic speakers, as the Gaeltacht, or identified with their specific clan and region of Scotland. And the Lowlanders were mainly wearing breeches and trousers and generally saw the Highlanders as, their bit more barbarian neighbours, where they were a bit more civilised and progressive. So we can definitely bust the whole thing of true Scotsmen for this time period of 17th century, early 18th century. However, let's revisit Martin Martin's quote. He says that folk travelling on foot prefer to go without any breeches or trousers. And from my experimenting, from my travelling and living short periods of time in the 17th century kit, I can definitely see the benefit of this. And let me explain why. The Highlands is covered in very rough terrain, often very high heather and rocky hillside, right? You have to be able to lift your legs really high. Now, before the evolution of elastic, all breeches and trousers would have had to be sewn. And really, right up till relatively recently, only a few modern outdoor brands I know can actually make trousers that don't pop at the crotch. It's very difficult to make decent, very, maneuverable trousers, especially using historic techniques. Now, people were wearing breeches and trews, but these were generally more expensive, probably because they were harder to make trews that could withstand traveling all the time. Now, you do see some medieval sort of underwear, which is kind of like a loincloth, and then the trouser legs don't actually attach to the crotch. They're more just like stockings. Potentially some trews were a bit more like that, so you just don't have any wear and tear around the crotch because there is no fabric there. But yeah, so there's some practical reasons. Old-fashioned trousers just always seem to pop at the crotch. Now, another reason is, of course, I've covered how multifunctional the great kilt is in many past videos. How it's your jacket and it's your sleeping bag. But because it's such a big bit of fabric, it's really unwieldy and it's also really heavy. So you have to wrap it around yourself. This means that you're essentially walking around with 4 to 5 meters of wool around your waist. This gets really warm, so it's actually quite handy to have some consistent ventilation there. So when I'm traveling in the 17th century kit, I personally prefer to have some breeches on me, either some linen or wool ones, usually once I've stopped, usually when it gets cold or when the midges come out. But yeah, I can absolutely agree with Martin Martin's quote. When you're traveling around, it is much nicer and actually way more freeing compared to modern trousers to have this level of leg maneuverability. It's amazing. So that part of the myth, did Highlanders wear underwear? Well, according to Martin Martin and Bert's little quote about their indecency, yeah, probably some of them traveling on foot didn't wear underwear. It's more practical. But I doubt they made a big deal about it. It was probably just really normal. Yeah, just not wearing underwear. Don't make a big thing about it. So now we'll finish with another common question I get. Should I wear underwear with my kilt? Well, it's up to you. Sometimes it's nice, especially when the biting insects are out, and to stop chafing. It's also a bit more hygienic, but also it's quite nice to feel the breeze sometimes. So it's up to you. Now, how to respond to if someone asks you if you're wearing underwear under your kilt? Just say, mind your own flipping business. Or just flash them. Either all works. Thanks for watching, folks. Hope you enjoyed this slightly strange but hopefully interesting video. Don't forget to jump on that comedy t-shirt before it's gone. Check out my online school, Resilient Roots. Come support me on the Patreon page if you want, and help me decide on future video projects. And until then, feel the breeze and have fun learning history. Cheery bye.